Hello everyone, I am Lawyer Bodo and welcome to Let's Play Against the Storm. Against the Storm is a roguelike city builder set in a world where it never stops raining. Players are tasked by an invisible and mysterious queen to establish settlements outside of a smoldering city in order to provide the city with food, artifacts and vestiges of old machinery. Each new map is procedurally generated and players have to organize their settlement around the resources available on that map, as well as balance the strengths, weaknesses, and needs of their human, beaver, and lizard colonists in order to succeed. This Let's Play series will be played on the experimental branch of the game, version 0.13.2.e. Against the Storm is available in early access in the Epic Store. That being said, let's jump in the game and start off this city building adventure. For now, the smoldering city does not offer us much, but soon we will be able to purchase upgrades and unlock new buildings there, as well as complete deeds that will mark our progression through the game and through the seasons. Let's place our first settlement, which can only be placed at a maximum distance of 2 tiles from the city, and where we place it is not too important for now, since every settlement, if successful, will bring us 14 food and 60 experience. I chose to settle here in a royal woodland, thinking that there might be an interesting biome just above me to settle in later on. The severity is mild, meaning I will have 3 buffs and 2 debuffs active at different seasons during the run. Food-wise, the map also has a decent amount of roots, eggs, meat, mushroom, vegetables, and berries. And resources-wise, a very high amount of fiber and clay, which I can then turn into fabric and brick, but low amounts of resin and leather. This essentially means that all types of gathering camps will be useful on this map, and that I shouldn't have too much difficulty resource-wise, since resin and leather are not key resources for success. Having little choice available for now, I embark with some extra eggs and roots, which are edible, and wood for building and firekeeping. This map is a royal woodland map, and therefore harvesting speed is increased by 10% at all times. The 3 buffs I have active during the drizzle, the equivalent of spring, are an increase in my mushroom harvests, an increase in my villagers' mood if I can provide them with services, such as religion in a temple or brotherhood in a tavern, and another increase in mood if I can provide them with complex food, such as jerkies or pies. The 2 debuffs I have require me to build houses for my villagers so that they are sheltered from the storm, otherwise they risk suffering a 40% speed debuff or worse, death. Immediately, I drop down my first woodcutter's camp, a stonecutter's camp, to pick up those roots, and after noticing that there are eggs in my area, I hope for a trapper's camp for my first building. I start looking at what set of buildings I can choose from, and luckily pick the trapper's camp, the lumber mill for cheaper planks and flour production down the line, and the farm for vegetable and grain production. I sit down my trapper's camp, build a few roads for my villager for them to walk faster, and start attributing tasks to my villagers. I put beavers in the woodcutter's camp, since they are proficient in woodcutting, and proficient villagers have a 10% chance to double their production, and lizard at the trapper's camp, since they are proficient in trapping. I receive my first cornerstone and choose to buff my farm production by 50%. I receive my first orders from my queen. Completing each order is going to give me 1 reputation point as well as buildings, so I need to pick wisely since the settlement will have succeeded once I hit 12 reputation points. I choose an order to build 35 path with a 10% movement speed reward, an order to build a trading post and send 5 amber to the queen, and an order to trade goods worth 10 amber with the trader, which synergizes well with the one I just mentioned. I then build some basic shelters for my people, complete my first order, and open my first glade, as well as do some keyboard rebuy. With my first order complete, I get 1 reputation point and get to choose between 3 buildings. The smokehouse allows me to make jerky, which is loved by lizards and humans, but not having any good source of meat, I postpone my decision to see what I can find in other glades. I make a crude workshop to produce some fabric and planks, which will be necessary for higher tier buildings and items. I drop down my trading post and order my woodcutters to open more glades. All of the glades I've opened so far contain eggs, and one of them contains meat, which can be harvested by trappers, so I'm feeling pretty good about that early trapper camp pick. Having a bit of meat available, I go ahead and pick the smokehouse as my next building. The first storm arrives, and all my villagers suffer a debuff to the resolve, but thankfully they are all housed, so none of them die. After the storm passes, I receive new orders and get to pick a new cornerstone and welcome new villagers. I pick a cornerstone that increases my woodcutter's speed and pick the group of villagers with the most lizards, since I want them to be trapping as much as they can, since they're proficient in trapping. I build a lumber mill and wait for the trader to arrive. I decide to buy a bit of brick, since I have no clay or stone on my map, which I need for my lumber mill. I build a scavenger's camp to scavenge the fiber that is nearby and realize at that moment that the closier would have been a great pick, since it would have allowed me to transform that fiber into coats that would have kept my villagers dry in the storm, but oh well, live and learn. I then build a hearth in order to reduce the forest hostility. The higher the hostility, the less resolve my villagers have, and the more the queen becomes impatient. And if the queen's impatience reaches 12, I am called back to the city, the settlement is destroyed, and I have failed. I trade some roots against stones to get a few more bricks for my hearth, and move my woodcutter's camp to open a few more smaller glades and slowly expand my settlement. As the second year passes and the second storm arrives, I build a smokehouse to transform that sweet meat into jerky, but nothing else of particular importance happens, allowing us to skip ahead a bit. As the second storm clears, I pick up some new orders, a great cornerstone that gives me 5 meat per minute, which is going to synergize very well with the smokehouse, and new villagers. I was hoping for more lizards, but no chance. During the third year of my settlement, I continue progression and fulfill a few more of my queen's orders. In addition to providing me with 1 reputation point, each order completed also reduces the queen's impatience towards me, which is particularly helpful. Doing so also reduces the level of the forest hostility towards me, which makes it that my villagers' resolve is not tested as hard. However, the forest hostility, as well as the queen's impatience, grow inexorably over time, so I can't just dilly-dally around and need to get my reputation up. Thankfully, the beef jerky I now am producing en masse has brought a lot of resolve to my lizards, and in order to boost their resolve further, I choose to favor them over my other villagers. This severely hampers the resolve of my beavers and humans, but boosts my lizard resolve high enough to start granting me reputation points. I trade goods worth 5 amber to complete an order and get a new building for it. I chose the bakery because it allows me to produce pies and biscuits that are complex foods for beavers and humans, which will increase their resolve and also trigger their buff during the drizzle. Pies and biscuits also requires flour, which synergizes well with my farm. Now, if only I could get some fertile land for my farm. After the third storm, I pick up once more a cornerstone that increases my woodcutter speed by 50%, get some new orders, as well as a group of villagers with the most humans for my farms. With so many idle hands, I make another woodcutter's camp and decide to open a dangerous glade, desperate for fertile land. Lo and behold, a large patch of fertile land is uncovered as I discover this dangerous glade, as well as a large patch of brood mother's egg, which gives me even more meat for my jerky. No pun intended. The dangerous glade contains a small destroyed caravan, which reduces my global resolve by 5, and therefore send a bunch of people to get rid of it. I can choose between keeping rewards for myself or sending them to the citadel. I choose to send them to the citadel, which grants me some amber as well as half a reputation point. I build a storage next to my farm so that my farmers can quickly drop their grain off in the storage and don't have to run to the central storage to do so, and also to complete one of my queen's orders. I discover another patch of fertile land in the next glade I open and can now start making farms for grain, which I will in turn transform into flour for my biscuits and pies. The fourth storm arrives and I receive my last orders for my queen, and luckily, as a cornerstone, I once more get to increase my farm production by 50%. My farm now produces 8 grains per patch of land instead of the usual 4. I complete a few additional orders by purchasing some herbs for my biscuit production. I get the blueprints for a brewery, which allows me to transform my grain into beer if I ever manage to get some pottery or barrel. I also continue making some makeshift hearth to reduce the forest's hostility, as well as provide a resting place for my workers, which is closer to their working location than the central herd. As my next blueprint, I pick a tavern, since I have a brewery, and also since it provides brotherhood for no resources at all, which, if you remember correctly, is a service for my lizards and will thus buff my lizards during the drizzle. If I can get my elk production going, this will also satisfy the leisure service for my beavers. My 5th year is particularly uneventful as I spend my time clearing some wood for my brewery, getting my biscuit and pie production up, as well as trading a bit of material for some bricks in order to build my brewery. The 5th storm hits, and unfortunately that does not go as peacefully as the previous 4 had. Unfortunately, in the 5th storm, one of my beavers did not have a shelter and perished in a hailstorm. That is the first and unfortunately not the last beaver that will suffer a horrendous fate at my hands. His sacrifice was not in vain, but will most likely not be remembered. The stroke of bad luck continues, and the cornerstone proposed at the end of the 5th storm are dreadful, and I opt to pick none of them, since picking one would actually be detrimental to my village. I spent the beginning of my 5th year getting my biscuit production online by purchasing some roots, as well as making a makeshift post to produce packed goods, crops, and building materials that will be sent to my queen as part of her orders. I proceed to open another dangerous glade, which does not give me any particularly interesting resources or building, and choose to salvage those I can. Salvaging those buildings provides me with tools I can then use to solve some abandoned caches. Solving those caches will give me amber and reputation, which will push me even further towards that 12 points of reputation I need. I finally obtain the blueprint for the closier, which I build immediately, and focus on keeping my villagers' resolve high enough to gain me reputation, and complete a few more orders to obtain my 12 points of reputation. This settlement is pretty much won by now. I have a steady flow of complex foods for all 3 of my races, strong food and wood production, and I'm able to provide services as well as coats to my people and still have a bunch of orders I could complete for reputation. I decide to burn some wood at my main hearth to increase resolve. And with that, I reach my 12th point of reputation and secure my settlement. This seems like a good point to end this episode, and we'll visit the smoldering city next time to see what we have unlocked with our resounding success. Thank you all for dropping by, and see you in the next episode.